Another term from cognitive psychology are target memories, and this is your curriculum. Everything that your students need to know and be able to do, target memories. Now, I was fortunate to visit a sixth form college, and it was incredible. I was in a particular lesson where the behaviour was great. It was A level, obviously, and the science teacher was going through his PowerPoint. Everyone was listening carefully. And as I walked around the class, some students were trying to write down everything he was saying, and some wrote the bare minimum, and then some were somewhere in between. Their class notes were completely inconsistent. They weren't sure what the target memories were, what they should and shouldn't be writing. And I gave that feedback to the teacher. To what do you suggest I do? I said, "Just be explicit, just tell them. Tell them when it's something that is really important and you expect them to write down, and then if it's optional." In that sixth form college, they added symbols to their slides. So an ear would just mean listen, pen, write it down, exclamation mark. It's very important. But I've seen this happen in my classroom where students remember things that I think, you don't really need to remember that. That's not important. I wish I hadn't have said that." And then the things that are really important, that's what they might struggle to forget. So a good way to do that, as I've said, is tell the class what they need to know and what's nice to know. I was in one of the history sessions today, and at their school they have, you must know this, and then this is extend. This is nice to know. This is extra. This is desirable knowledge. So they're making that really clear. So the way that we can focus on the target memories is by looking at our existing resources, looking at the slides, looking at the worksheets. If there's anything that's not essential, we could either delete that, or if you need to keep it, then put the really important information, bold, highlight it, underline it. Keep reminding the students. Nothing on a retrieval quiz should be a shock or a surprise, because it's obviously content they've been taught before. The teacher is saying how this is important. You need to know this key term. I'm going to ask you about this later. And then our quizzes need to, first of all, really focus on the target memories. Once students have been successful, they've mastered that, then we can start to build in that extend, that desirable knowledge. And a really good way to ensure that the target memories are consistent across a department are through the use of question banks. So when I was head of department, I realised that we'd gone slightly rogue in my department. So we were all very different in our teaching style, teaching the same curriculum and the same learning intention, but someone might have spent a little bit longer on this topic, and our questions were slightly different. And I needed to bring back some consistency in the of the different people in my department. So we created question banks, but I know we have some sponsors here today who have their own question banks. So they're brilliant. They really are, and can save a lot in terms of workload. But we would have a series of questions and answers for each unit. And we spread this out to spread the workload, and then we quality assured. So then when we had these questions, the teachers could decide, well, I'll use Carousel, or I'll use Educate, or I'll use a mini whiteboard. We're asking the same questions. We then also used the question banks and gave them to the students later. They said, if you want to create flashcards, here's the questions, here's the answers. If you want to do self-quizzing, pair quizzing, give them to the parents. If you want to help your child, here's all the questions and here's all the answers that they should be able to know. So again, really coming back to the target memories. And highlighting is known as not being one of the most effective study strategies, and there are loads of reasons why. Um, if everything is highlighted, nothing is highlighted. And that also shows because students struggle to find what the target memories are. Now, highlighting can be used at the starting point, but students need instruction, what to highlight, why to highlight, and then what to do with the highlighted information. Dan Millendon, he's amazing. If you haven't read his book, it's Cognitive Science. To review every lesson plan in terms of what pupils will think about. What they think about, they will remember. And we want them to think about the target memories. That's why I don't use an exit ticket like this anymore. I'd write down 3 things you found out this lesson, they'd fill it in, I'd collect it, and they'd say, "Oh, I found out today." Generally, someone wrote that Miss Jones went to Greece on holidays. Was it the time that gave it away? I don't know. And that was true, but that's not what I wanted on the exit ticket. Sometimes if we want better answers, we've got to ask better questions. So not everyone wrote things like that, but we can't be disappointed if the students don't write the things down that we want them to if we haven't given them specific guidance. Still got the exit ticket. You could have 1 question to 3, 5. This is another opportunity to just check for understanding. This is performance, so this is not retrieval practice. These are questions from my question bank, and I've got to ask them again at a later date to see if students can still answer them correctly from long-term memory. So I recycle my exit ticket into an entrance ticket, not a do now activity. And then the students say, "Oh, miss, we've already answered these. Why are we answering them again?" And again, that's another opportunity to explain why we do what we do in the classroom. So retrieval practice. I've written books about retrieval practice, so I'm just gonna try and, summarize here. But even when I wrote the first book, people said, "How could you write a book about that?" But it's continues to evolve, and we've got fantastic resources now with retrieval practice, and these are the different types of retrieval practice. And teachers say, "Oh, what's the best type?" Mm, it depends. Because for older students, we want free recall, which is challenging, makes them think hard, greater benefits. But research is pretty clear that younger children struggle with free recall. Their answers might be quite vague, generalized, so they would probably benefit from the top row. Multiple choice questions are great to a point. We have to then reach a point where we go beyond the multiple choice. We have the elaboration and explanation. And this is just an example from my history classroom. What can you recall about Henry VIII? A year 12 class can answer this. Right, they'll have rich discussions or they'll write something down and self-assess it. I could ask this to year 8. Well, I did ask this to year 8, and some of their answers were vague and generalized and irrelevant. Again, they weren't retrieving the things that I really wanted them to retrieve. So it would be better to ask this question later in the term for my younger students and perhaps do some more guided free recall. So what can you recall about Henry VIII and the closure of the monasteries? You're guiding their retrieval. You're telling them, this is what I want you to recall, either verbally or through a written response. Then we've also got cued recall. So this was that same year 8 class where I had said to the class, can you just write down, explain how each image links to Henry VIII and the break with Rome? And that's all it was, a prompt, a picture prompt to trigger their memory, to make sure they're writing about the money made from the monasteries and the desire for divorce and male heir. So I didn't know when I originally created this about the encoding specificity principle. So how I would teach that now is I would use these symbols in the encoding stage and then also in the retrieval. Short answer questions easily be our next step up from the multiple choice. We've got mini whiteboards, write them down, verbal, quizzing. Oh, what a coincidence. As a learner educator here. Um, but they are brilliant. They really are in terms of what I really love, especially about Carousel, is something that they're really promoting. And we've also got a book by Rose here about homework. It's retrieval practice outside of the classroom. Retrieval practice that's just limited to 5 minutes at the start of a lesson, of course, that's better than nothing. But when the research is so clear that retrieval practice is this really effective teaching and learning strategy combined with space practice, then we've really got to make the most of it, more than just 5 minutes in a lesson, and really give it the time that it deserves. Okay, so I'm gonna finish with verbal feedback. This isn't often linked in with cognitive science, but you could have a really good conversation, either one-on-one or pairs, group, or class, and you've given this feedback, and we know there's lots of benefits to verbal feedback. You can explain things you can't do through written feedback, your tone, your gestures, your non-verbal. The students can ask questions. It's difficult to give one-on-one, especially if you've got a large class size. So imagine you are trying to give one-to-one feedback, students smiling, they're nodding, "Thank you, miss, I know now what I need to do." You move on, you come back to that student, "Wait a minute, why are they still making that mistake?" "Oh, I forgot." And that's again because of working memory. So they understood your feedback, they grasped it, but then as they carried on working, they quickly forgot about it. So one of the things that we can do is get the students to write it down. And this is really good to check. their understanding of the feedback. They can write it in the margin, they can write it on a Post-it note, they have a record of it, they've put the feedback into their own words. What would be even better than making a note of it is for the student to act on that feedback immediately. And Dylan Williams calls this the detective strategy. So, I'll just give you a word of warning. Some of my students, they don't always like this, and the reason for that is because they have to find and fix the errors. So if you're in a maths lesson, you're walking around the class, students answered 5 questions, detective strategy, take 2 are incorrect, find and fix them. They'd rather you just say, that's wrong, here's the answer." This makes them really engage, double check, and get into good learning habits. It could be if they're doing a written piece of work, you might say, "There's 2 errors in that paragraph." Or perhaps you might adapt because you know your students, so you might be more specific and say, "There's 2 errors in that paragraph, and they are spelling errors, or one's a factual, or one's a key date." But it is important that they act on this right now, because if they say, "Yeah, I'll just finish the rest of the essay, I'll do the 20 questions and come back to it," they'll probably forget. Dylan Williams encourages teachers to stay there so that students act on it immediately, and you can. But I've had a few examples where students are like, "Miss, are you gonna stay there the whole time?" And it's a little bit awkward, so I say, "Right, I'm gonna come back, but there's the expectation that you act on this right now." Okay, I'm gonna finish. I'm almost there. The dot marking also supports working memory. As the teacher's walking around the class, it's find and fix, just a dot in the margin. The dot, similar, there's something on that line you need to find and fix. And the dot will mean they won't forget which line it is, and it's just giving them a little bit of guidance, but they still have to find it and fix it. If you've got some students who still think, "Oh, I can't find that error," then that's where we could do the helpful highlighting or the useful underlining, where the teacher finds an error, a mistake, they've highlighted it, they've underlined it, but then the student has to then correct it. Okay, so I authored a free ebook about retrieval practice, myths, reputations, and mistakes, how to avoid them. You can download that, and my colleagues at Evidence-Based Education wrote that, Understanding Memory and Learning. That's free and the Evidence-Based Education Resource Library. So please do check that out. And oh, also I've got some books over there, and we're giving away some of my books in the raffle. And yet, do stay in touch with me. Social media, my email, LinkedIn, there's too many platforms now, but I'm trying to be across them all. So thank you very much, and I hope that was helpful.